Brilliant. I think we'll kick off then. Welcome, everybody. I hope you've been enjoying today's online sessions. It's been really stimulating for me. I've really enjoyed the discussion throughout the day. I'm Roshni, a researcher from the Ada Lovelace Institute, and I'm really pleased to be joined by an excellent group of speakers today who'll be offering some, I think, unique reflections on how participatory methods can be applied to real-world questions and urgency surrounding the deployment of AI in society. So without further ado, I will hand over to our first speakers. But as we're going, please feel free to kind of post questions in the chat, and we'll have some time for Q&A once all the speakers have presented. So I'm going to hand over to Connal Parsley and Ruth Catlow, who will be sharing kind of learning on the use of live action role play as a method to tackle some knotty questions surrounding kind of AI decision making. So over to you.
Thank you so much. I've just started sharing my screen, and I hope that everyone can see that. You can also see our notes, which is fantastic. Um, I think, but
No, it looks good from us. No notes.
no notes.
Yeah.
Miracle. Thank you. Thank you so much, Roshni, for the wonderful and warm introduction. And thanks to for the organizers of pairs and the administrators and everyone who's helping to make it happen. And we're really looking forward to sharing our work with you and hearing what you're up to as well. In this talk, it's less an academic paper and more trying to share what we've been doing and are currently doing in an ongoing way. With us today is myself and Ruth Catlow from arts organisation Furtherfield. But we're missing today another important co-organizer, Connor Heaney from the University of Kent. But it's just me and Ruth today. So, live action role play. We'll talk more about that in a moment, but essentially, what we want to talk to you about today is our attempt to answer in a very practical and organized, hopefully, way, an answer to this question: what if affected and knowledgeable people were to design, build, own, and evaluate public-facing government decision systems? So there's a kind of radical politics embedded in there, which we'll talk about a bit in a moment. Ruth.
Yes, so Connell, why don't you say who you are in this program first, and then I'll take over.
Excellent. So I'm Connal Parsley, Associate Professor at the University of Kent and a UKRI Future Leaders Fellow. I'm a legal theorist effectively, but I work across disciplines, creative arts, legal theory, political philosophy, and philosophy of technology. And I'm all about creating interdisciplinary and participatory spaces. Ruth?
Thank you. Yeah, so I'm an artist and I'm co-founder of Furtherfield for art, technology, and eco-social change, really since the mid-90s. And since that time, our focus has really been on kind of, in the early days, the participatory web, and in more recent years, pulling our learnings from those kind of like heady early days of the web into physical space through live action role play. So for those that don't know anything about live action role play, it's like a game of make believe for adults. So this is where participants play characters who then interact to pursue goals within a fictional scenario or setting. And at Furtherfield, for about the last 10 years, we've been working with LARP to explore and test the local and global consequences of advanced tech for both human and more than human interests. And we find it a very potent research tool for allowing us to pull together people across domain and knowledge expertise domains, and to kind of like take the approach of we don't research any topic without involving those who will be affected. So this is it's really important that in this project how the expertise that Connal and Connor are bringing from kind of legal theory and the kind of philosophy of law and politics is combining with this kind of very practical participatory process.
Thanks, Ruth. So looking further at the question of why LARP, I mean, I suppose I'll put all this up on the slide actually. Effectively, we're trying to respond to a real problem in the way the administrative state is handling the introduction of algorithmic tech. The algorithmic tech is really disrupting state processes so that the state is really in flux. And nobody really knows how to fix it. We've seen all kinds of big public scandals arising because of the way states are integrating this technology. Um, what's really wrong is that our way of evaluating these processes has broken down. We're used to decision makers being unitary humans. Eventually, we have these big distributed data-driven kind of systems. So as a response, we're turning to speculative prefiguration. We can't really step in and start modeling ideal decision systems because we don't know what those are or what they would look like in the context of the administrative state. But what we can do is model participatory ways of working together to figure out how they should be designed, involving more voices. So the creative arts space is really critical to our research practice. It's about leveraging the creativity and the flexibility of that space to let other people who aren't actually from that space in to explore different ways of working. Those people might be working in government and have lots of ideas, but be too constrained in their role to know to sort of begin to start experimenting. So we're creating that opportunity. We're really turning to a kind of mode of live action role play as practical collective modeling, where we're modeling also the inclusion of broader and more diverse kinds of expertise in the design of government systems. So what we're doing is really running across the life of the whole project, a series of 3 LARPs over 7 years. The overriding interest in all of this is exploring and modeling holistic decision ecology design. So our first LARP, there is a drone strike game, which might sound controversial. We can talk about that later if you want. Modeling a jury-style drone strike authorization process. Obviously, a bit of a Black Mirror scenario. The second one, which is the one we're mainly talking about today, is a participatory co-design of a system to automatically grant permits for the use of public space. And we'll talk more about that in a moment. And the final one, we don't know too much about that yet because we're really finding out as we go how to do this. We have planned aims to model a real or at least realistic government decision system, drawing on what we learned from the previous 2 LARPs and working closely with a government department. So, Ruth, do you want to say a bit about the LARP we're doing now?
Yeah. Okay. So, in the Methexis Park scenario, that's the name of our LARP. A group has gathered to design an automated permitting system for a green recreation space that has a kind of broad ecological significance. It's set in an alternate timeline to the present, and a local government is authorised to issue the use of permits to a range of users for this kind of blue and green space. Could we have the next slide?
Got it.
So the environment is some kind of smart space. So we're handling data coming from sensors that monitor the ecosystem and species health. The decisions that the permits are issued against have a very high number of complex variables and priorities. And in this scenario, the government wants to automate permits and even the management of crowd numbers and general access. Knowing that it will be controversial, they're trialing a new kind of democratic process. So you can see even at this top level description, we're looking at a kind of full spectrum politics. We're working with more than human politics, which is both the kind of tech ecosystem, but also looking at ecological justice issues, which I have a long history of working with. We've done a lot of interspecies justice role plays. And so we're really looking at kind of like what this process would be, what it might look like, and together we're going to discover some ways that this might go. So crucially, we're not producing a system design, but really trying to model the process of designing a radically inclusive system. And the outcome of this will be a kind of a fictional algorithmic design system that results from a participatory co-design process. But we're always running, as always with these kind of research lots, we're running two layers. So you have the realm of activity and decision where all the drama and action is taking place, but we're also having this meta layer of reflection and evaluation of what these things mean. Over to you, Connal.
Great. Yeah. So, I mean, I don't know if this is interesting for people, but this is a kind of example of the kinds of spreadsheet we're working with where we have to map the timeline from like designing the game to sort of gradually, we've gradually brought a group on to help us design the game because we want to be inclusive about how that is working. But at some point, at some magical point in the process, which will come in the next couple of months, we'll slip from designing the game into our roles as people within the game, designing the decision system. So it's just a lot of administration, imagination, catalyzing different kinds of people to be involved, convincing people to play, and setting in motion this kind of moving tapestry that we'll hope will come together to make spaces where people can usefully have collective agency over decision system designs.
So, as a way to get kind of like pluralistic knowledges and information into our game, we hosted a meeting with policymakers, government departments, lawyers, designers, social scientists, using a consultation process designed by myself and Anne Light. And using this process, the importance of the process that we designed is that it brings kind of like diverse lenses like traditional innovation cultures and ecological cultures looking, or ecologist cultures, like looking at planetary boundaries, and it brings them into the same room and you start to feel the conflict between these people coming from very different sectors. And this means that we're kind of like, it's another way for us to feel and ensure that we're kind of like really prioritizing radical inclusion in all the levels of our process.
So the next slide is supposed to show how the different layers or registers come together and are always working. So we're always designing, we're always playing, and we're always modeling. I don't want to say too much about that though, in the interest of time, and I'll pass back to you, Ruth, to talk about the play phases and tech platforms.
Thank you. So this happens in three main play phases. The Methexis Park LARP. There's two online and one in person. So we have the briefing, which is an asynchronous process of information giving, calling for expertise and perspective mapping. We have informing, which experiments with discourse and polis. So this is about peer-to-peer interrogation, mutually informing each other and the process. And then for the live summit in person in London, we have a kind of 2-day deliberation where people really feel what's at stake in the process. And we will agonistically like duke it out, basically, people from different backgrounds really working out what's important, bringing their knowledge to the design of this kind of fictional system for a fictional government department. Over to you, Connal.
Yeah, great. So really, this process is modeled kind of on a process you might be aware of, the V-Taiwan system, which is the Taiwanese government's online digital deliberation platform. We've shown a sort of sample of their flowchart there on the left. We've designed our own very different flowchart. And we're also using Polis, which is some of you may be aware of, an online data-driven consensus finding tool, really. We're using it less to find consensus because we don't actually think, well, our politics is not necessarily based around consensus, but contestation. But we're using it to identify issues and try and map how different kinds of people feel about different kinds of approaches to those issues. In the interest of time, I won't say too much more about those. If people are interested in Polis or Discord, we can talk about them after. So, Ruth, for the question of who's playing.
I mean, I think I've already talked about the people who were in the first consultation meeting, and many of those people, plus some designers and technologists and engineers, are coming in. But I think I'll hand over to you, Connal, so that we can keep it brief, just to
Yeah,
wrap
great. I mean,
things
I would
up.
just say we're drawing really widely on our multidisciplinary research networks. For this LARP, we're less targeting sort of members of the public, although they will, obviously everyone's members of the public. But we're targeting specifically different kinds of expertise, so different kinds of researchers, government staff and people in the civil service, lawyers, judges, technologists and so on. What we're really trying to do is get as a broad a perspective as we can on different kinds of technical and political expertise and ideas. The idea is to include people, politics, and questions of value, what's valuable, what's good, that interface with AI systems, but are typically excluded from government decision system design, and as well as technical engineering, audit, and evaluation methods. So what we're really trying to do is model a different kind of politics from the one that's currently dominating the way AI is being integrated into the state. So a kind of anti-Palantir, if you will. So just to take us out, we wanted to invite people from the Pairs network to connect with us. There's a few QR codes there. I'll put them up again in a second, so don't worry if you don't grab them. First of all, I mean, we'd be really interested in hearing from people who have a specialist expertise in participation to join the process, to contest what we're doing, to say we haven't thought of something. We're really deliberately building a space where that can happen. So if that's your interest and you want to kind of get critically involved in what we're doing, please do. Or if you just want to play the game, that's great as well. But there are other kind of project things on the horizon for the broader project. So another LARP, as we mentioned, in the coming years. We're also open to developing new uses of LARP for participatory AI system design. I'll just say a little word about the broader project. It's a 7-year project funded by the UKRI, and it's really looking at how we evaluate AI systems in institutional contexts, which we think is a question that hasn't really been taken up seriously enough. We tend to think we know the values that we want to instantiate in AI, equality, transparency, and so on, but we've also seen that they don't play very nicely with AI systems. So the point of this project is to re-ask that value question again and say, how can we collectively get together to invent or engineer values that work for the scrutiny and evaluation of AI systems? That's really it from us. There's those QR codes again. Thanks again so very much for hosting us, and we're looking forward to hearing what everyone else is up to. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was super interesting. I really loved, the way you're bringing together so much different expertise, and kind of using that as part of your learning process as you develop your methods going forward. I'm going to pass over now to Genevieve Smith, who will share about their work on participatory design methods and how this can kind of help us unpack concepts surrounding data governance. So over to you, Genevieve.
Great. Thank you so much. Wonderful to be here with you all. I'm just going to share screen here. Okay, so I'm Genevieve Smith. I am a postdoc fellow at Stanford, and I am the founding director of the Responsible AI Initiative at the UC Berkeley AI Research Lab. And this is a project with some colleagues, Javon Power and Fiona Sarma, as well as some other contributors from a workshop that I'll be sharing with you more about, and some of a kind of mid-project update. So this is about designing data futures, speculative and participatory approaches to equitable data governance. And the purpose of our project is to explore the role that speculative and participatory design can play in advancing participatory data governance and informing a new global data cooperative that we are soon to be creating. So I'll be walking through the background, questions and methods, our results, and then the discussion, design implications, and takeaways. So as some quick background, these are probably fairly familiar to everybody on this call, but there are, of course, big calls to make AI technologies more inclusive. And we see this quite a bit with foundation models and generative tools around language, images, etc. And there are big tech is developing initiatives such as No Language Left Behind around collecting more language data globally. You see that around examples with Google and whatnot as well with their 1,000 language initiative, and really a drive for coming oftentimes from big tech to collect more data from communities globally, but oftentimes it can be done in very extractive ways. So data governance is a field of socio-legal research that gained traction in the early 2010s, and it really responded to this increasing recognition of datafication in public and private spheres, and also this concentration of power in the hands of data collecting organizations, in many cases, big tech. But data is a locus of social, political, and economic contestation. Who's benefiting from its use, under what terms, with what responsibilities, to whom, are all open and critical questions. Now, there is quite a bit of centralized data collection, as I mentioned, inside of big tech. And this, as Shoshana Zuboff has called out, this rise of surveillance capitalism and this commodification of people's data. So data intermediaries have emerged in this, within all this, which are essentially entities that have responsibilities when it comes to governance around data. That can include things like structural constraints, incentives, capabilities over the ecosystem. And there are a couple different types of data intermediaries. These can include data trusts, data commons, data cooperatives are some of those. Now, there's been a lot of policy attention to these concepts of participatory data governance and data cooperatives. We've seen that in the EU Data Governance Act, but most of the work in this space is around kind of supportive socio-legal concepts versus really trying to understand how are decisions made, how can stakeholder participation be meaningful and effective, especially at kind of data sets at scale. So specifically within data cooperatives, which is our main area, just to share a little bit more around these. So data cooperatives collectively collect, manage, distribute data for the representation and benefit of all their members. And data is provided by members, which serve as active participants in how the governance is created and ongoing governance decision making. And they're really designed to be built and run for the benefit of the people who are part of them and serving this collective goal and need and aspiration. Again, very much in reaction to surveillance capitalism and this kind of concentration of power when it comes to data. So the socio-technical framework for data cooperative management, there tend to be the data storers or cooperative members who provide the data, external users who might want to use the cooperative or the data set for different purposes. And then there's the actual cooperative system or the infrastructure around it. There's several limitations that I won't go into the details around, but essentially some to call out here that as cooperatives expand, democratic governance can get more complex and have power symmetries emerge. There's also various complexities when it comes to compliance and data standard navigation, as well as how to maintain equity of the voices of different diverse members as they scale. So third, just as some background to provide, is this research is also really grounded in alternative technology futures. So how might we envision alternative technology futures that are more grounded in diverse social and cultural perspectives? This really rises from traditions of feminist science and technology studies, design justice, speculative design, which remind us that technology is not neutral. It's developed by people in certain places with certain positionalities. So participatory and co-design methods are really central to thinking about these calls in AI of envisioning alternative tech futures. And it moves beyond this kind of technical abstraction and to really collectively imagine or critique and kind of co-create different types of artifacts that can interrogate socio-technical questions and develop different AI governance mechanisms. So futures-oriented methods really extend these participatory design methods as well to have communities imagine and deliberate on these different tech futures, such as through futures workshops and participatory speculative design. So we conducted a workshop which extends and builds off the lineage of this participatory futures and speculative design methods. And we really wanted to understand how alternative futures of data governance could be collectively imagined, negotiated, and enacted. So that kind of leads us to our questions and methods, which is wanting to understand the ways that speculative and participatory design can play in co-creation for data governance, especially kind of upstream before data sets even developed. Second, we wanted to know what kind of governance themes and tensions might emerge when practitioners and experts kind of collectively imagine and design a global data cooperative. And then what are some of the methodological affordances and limitations of speculative and participatory design when we are building different kind of data governance structures? So we conducted a virtual workshop building on these approaches to really kind of elicit collective imaginaries, design directions for this global image data cooperative that we are going to be creating using things like what if scenarios. For our participants, there were 20 in total, a global audience, or folks from various countries globally representing diverse backgrounds and experiences in participatory data governance and cooperatives. We did inductive thematic analysis of group level artifacts. So moving on to our results, at a high level, we co-created guiding principles and design directions for a global data set. Now, this global image data set will be comprised of images that are counter-stereotypical for gender and more inclusive of different gender identities in several countries globally. And so we designed how that data set and data cooperative could collect data in ways that are ethical and manage and steward that data in equitable and collectively governed ways. And then we mapped the cooperative across its life cycle, looking at both foundational data collection, what needs to happen up front, and also in membership formation, and then ongoing practices and challenges over time in terms of the governance of the data set as it lives on. And there's some emergent tensions that come up. So a couple key themes. First is agency and control, governance, transparency, and trust. So we identified what's important in the foundational phase. So having consent and rights to withdraw or refuse that are ongoing. And then also different strategies for governance model and rule setup, as well as membership and participant structures and data management structures when it comes to governance. And then also in the foundational phase, really important to establish communication practices and have an early visibility to the goals of the data set and the founders. In terms of governance over time, having ongoing control over downstream use is really important for cooperative members and having continued withdrawal rights. Governance practices over time to be more robust and having ongoing rules, as well as really clear use, governance, and access management. And then transparency and trust, it's really important. It surfaced in the workshop that member forums and dialogue is really critical, as well as having ongoing trust building mechanisms and operational transparency around different aspects around the cooperative. Now, these are kind of just themes. We have, of course, really specific ones, but I'll get to some of those design implications from some of the specifics. Emergent tensions that come up here are around things like individual control versus collective decision-making, equality versus weighted influence, transparency versus privacy, and trust versus scale. And in the conversation, I'll talk more about some of these tensions. The second set of themes are power and representation, monetization, value and incentives, risk, harm and remediation, sustainability and stewardship. So in the foundational phase, different aspects came up around here around ensuring data set diversity from the outset. I'm really thinking about collective benefit framing and incentives, again, at this foundational phase, potentially having differential valuation of data. For example, having perhaps non-binary image data should be valued higher because it might be harder to get. Preventive safeguards and long-term care intermediate and imaginaries, thinking about how this could live over time. So the governance phase, these themes showed up as well in different aspects around ongoing inclusion and decision-making, benefit sharing, recourse repair and accountability, and institutional durability. And again, I won't go into too much of the tensions at this moment. I have a little bit more on that, but we can discuss some of the tensions that emerged in the conversation. But here are some of the ones around kind of global pluralism versus meaning, thinking about value creation versus potential for extraction, and representation over time. So just to briefly mention some of the tensions, this kind of one that really came up with was important was around kind of scaling participation while sustaining trust and shared meaning. So how can participatory legitimacy be maintained as decision-making becomes more distributed and this data set gets larger and more global? And then what does kind of global pluralism, how does that balance with shared aligned meaning, again, within a global image data set, especially when members might not share the same assumptions about what governance decisions mean in practice? And then balancing individual rights and collective authority is really important, and ensuring equity is central without reproducing new forms of power concentration. So again, should all members be treated equally in voting? Should there be contributions be weighted, especially on considerations like data that might be harder to get? And marginality could shift over time within a data set. So how do you avoid fixed diversity mechanisms or goals? And then the last one, tension, is really a technical one around legal and cultural landscapes and how to support withdrawal, especially as a data set would be used over time. So this just highlights that cooperative is not a settled governance model, but really an ongoing site of negotiation that requires continual adaptation to scale, cultural plurality, as well as shifting power dynamics. So just some key, some brief points, and then I'll wrap up, is that data cooperatives are really kind of serving as these alternative governance infrastructure, but they require infrastructure from a technical perspective, but they also require socio-technical tools and approaches. Really important to have consent and representation that are recognized as ongoing and relational. And scaling participation introduces and produces new tensions that don't always get resolved. But this kind of speculative participatory design process has been important to surface some of these data governance imaginaries. These are design implications. I won't go into the details here, but these are some of the pieces that we are implementing as we're now going into the development of this data cooperative, which will be about 40,000 images from 7 countries globally, representing various areas of the world. And so these are different practices that we're going to be implemented, that we're going to be implementing in this kind of pre-launch and data collection phase, and then governance over time. These are some good practices that surface from the workshop that we'll be implementing for that as well. And again, I won't go into these details for purposes of time. So on the takeaways and next steps, in terms of the question around co-creating participatory data governance upstream, this process really enables governance as a design opportunity and helps surface assumptions upfront around different important themes. And it also supports kind of collective sense making around long-term data use and its impacts. Or in the second question, emerging governance themes and tensions, there really were kind of critical themes that came up throughout the cooperative life cycle. So the ones that I mentioned around agency and control, governance, transparency and trust, et cetera. And we find that governance is really an ongoing negotiation, not something that's a fixed structure. So the workshop also surfaced really these persistent tensions and unresolved questions that inform ongoing areas for understanding and negotiations, ones that aren't necessarily solved and that we don't necessarily need to solve, but they're really important to recognize and keep in mind. And then third, there's just various methodological affordances and limitations for doing this kind of workshop and designing alternative tech futures. So things like eliciting values, imaginaries, and trade-offs, and also kind of surfacing these tensions and unresolved questions. Well, also there are some limitations around how to actually translate speculative insights into operational mechanisms, and certain voices remaining privileged in who participates. So next up, we'll be finalizing the setup for this data collection process and then the metadata approach using guidance from this research and the results. And we'll also be finalizing this paper, including with co-authors who are participants from the workshop. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Genevieve. Really looking forward to reading more about this. And there's been a lot of talk today about kind of Arnstein's ladder of participation, and I feel like data cooperatives really offer kind of something at that empowerment kind of area that we don't see in kind of other spaces. So yeah.
Okay, so my name is Rashid Mushkani. I'm a PhD student. I'm at the end of my PhD at the University of Montreal and MILA, which is Montreal Institute for Learning Algorithms. My work has been focused on participatory AI in cultural institutions, which in a good scenario, once all the parties agree on making a participatory approach towards AI, what are the challenges? So we did a bunch of projects during my thesis specifically, which I led. I had the opportunity to work with different organizations. So this is rather the fruits of all those projects, which I will be briefly touching upon. So I will be presenting the. Can you see slides change? Okay, that's perfect. So in a way, nowadays AI is entering public decisions fast, which the issue is most of the time these stakes are high domain, high value stakes in a sense, because public institutions, let's consider that public institutions requires public response towards what they're deploying. So in a way, most of the organizations, at least here in Canadian context, the government is pushing to deploy in so many domains, which yet that accountability is not in place. And for this, they're also looking to how include people, but rather in a more narrow and less practical or less participatory way, just trying to push the agenda of more protection. But in a way, this challenge is also when they make contracts with local AI providers, they're also in a point that those AI providers must improve their models while also trying to cater to that public. So in a way, this creates a problem of accountability, because usually when even there's minimum rate of participation, or if it's an ideal scenario, there's a lot of participation, that accountability cannot be traced along who participated, what questions were addressed, and how it impacted the outcome. So in a way, participation cannot survive throughout this pipeline. So usually it's once off scenario. At least that's what happens so far. Is like we do one workshop with participant, and then there's no follow up. So this gives us this impression that participation and AI governance is broken. Nonetheless, but they all agree on this. But its first reason is it's not traceable, even if it's quite all parties quite agree that we do participation. The second, it's not enforceable along the AI making and AI production and use. And second, if it's all of these happens, then it's also not compensated, and we lack mechanisms to know who needs to be compensated as well. So there's also an infrastructure problem. In a way, these leads to we can't even prove who participated, and we can't verify, and there's also no accountability that, in a sense, technically, even if all parties agree that participation is good and we need to include everyone, still participation can be symbolic because of this technical challenge. So in a way, what happens is like participation trail disappears, because usually when we do start with workshops, which is one of the classic means of citizen inclusion, and that we usually have labels and prompts, and afterwards we generate a report out of that through documents and sheets, and then we also in a good world scenario we might update the model behavior with that data if we are more responsible. But in a sense, once we do that, this is the amount that we can validly report on that this was happened. Apart from that, afterwards we can't verify what really happened and what really changed. So in a way, whatever harms comes afterwards, we can't track, we can't trace what happened. So in a sense, our claim is that governance of AI in this scenario, or usually participation in this scenario, it also needs regression tests along this pipeline of including people and working with the people. So in a sense, today, participation is a more kind of a report-based. It's hard to audit, it's hard to enforce, and it's hard to sustain. But what we are proposing as a framework is participation ledger, which what we can do with is like participation can be a version test, which it can be replayable across the life cycle and can be durable with the credit to people who participated. So our study is based on the four projects that we conducted, and we examined to what extent what was lacking during these projects, what was really the hurdles, and how they can be more improved towards better keeping record of who participated and what happened during those participation. So it's a cross synthesis of all these multiple projects. So it's grounded in real participatory AIs. One of them is AI project, which is aligned with what Polina was explaining in her work with respect to use of architecture and design itself and how it influences. We work here in community organizations with around 30 community organizations to annotate images and to see if we can steer and add this local take of how a image generator can behave and can visualize local architecture in a better way to adhere to local values. And then there's another project which is called Evadia, for this project we also collaborated with communities, which I won't go deep in them, but I'm happy to share more content. And also Street Review, which is another project, and WeDesign, which is also a consultation platform. Plus, we did some pilots with this as well. So overall, whatever I'm presenting today is a combination of all these projects, plus what these projects lack. So in a way, compensation and also the explicit trail of who participated towards what is lacking within these projects. That's how we came to understanding that how we can improve participation by doing these projects. So in a way, how we can summarize participation ledger is it makes participation traceable, it makes compensable, and it makes it enforceable. Of course, compensation depends on your budget, and there are a lot of other factors which are external to the project. But once you're within the project, how we can make sure that parties get compensated, that's what this is more constant towards. So, and then traceable influence, for example, who contributed to what and what changed. and enforceable authority in a sense that we try to have a replayable test before and after of any changes that happens. And then there's compensable labor that whoever participates, they provides labor. That's why there need to be credit for that participation. Of course, the credit can be different means, but in a way, the core proposal includes this test link influence graph, which whatever stage we start with is like it's a contribution stage. Which then within this we try to create an evidence record, and afterwards it gets influenced by a change. For example, if we try to modify some sort of behavior change towards the AI model, then what we can do, we can take a version of that before change, and with that, we can create an artifact of what that status was. So afterwards, once we create that artifact, we can allocate credits for that artifact. Maybe that artifact, maybe that credit at the initial stage might be 0 or might be none, or it might go to the people who already worked on it. But afterwards, if within that contribution, then we can test that contribution in terms of what has changed with the introduction of that contribution. Then we can rerun that evaluation with the test, and here we can have a voucher that we can allocate the credit and periodically. So we can run this whenever we have a change, and we can record whatever changes happen in an artifact. So with this, we can have a participation evidence standard, which can have in a way recruitment pathways, and we can have the roles and intermediaries who participated and who facilitated that participation, and also consent, who provided consent in terms of their privacy and scope, and also in compensation terms, how much they agreed on, how much they need to be compensated. And this will also give us some sort of reuse boundaries, because whatever artifact gets created, it encodes all these tiny features. So with these tiny features, it gets back reported that how they decide that their privacy should be preserved, and participants. So it's a more kind of a machine readable JSON LD format, which within that we can keep record of all the details and all the participants' information. Of course, we can make them confidential with the privacy preserving methods of only allowing them to access the information. But once it gets passed through the pipeline, it can be anonymized. And there are like the basic components. For example, test of change is one of the participatory regression suites, which before that, for example, if we use a prompt and we have a certain type of result, for this, if it's missing some sort of accessibility path or some issue, then we already have a record of this. Then afterwards, once we have this record in place, then whatever improvement we introduce, we can already implement this add-on value because we already have it in our record. In a way, we try to have a slow improvement. Each step adds more value. So, and then there's like a capability voucher, which in a way logs who generated the image and what context it was, and if they want to pause it, or if they're not okay with it. And in here we can keep record of enforcing the deployment control and also configuration management. And then once we release another version, is it ready to be deployed or not? If it fails, then it pauses, it cannot be deployed at that stage. Then we also have the participation credit, which is tied to ongoing compensation of the participants. And here we can have a community contributing to a test. When they contribute to a test, we already have them in their artifact, which that artifact captures whatever their contribution was. So after the regression test, we can allocate credits to that participants, and we can have more better record of whatever happened. So in a way, this already fits where teams already work. So whenever you're doing a capture stage, we can always deploy this within that capture stage of you trying to capture whatever problem with AI model you're making. And then also the build stage, that you can have a model that when you're making either fine-tuning a model, either creating a data set, you can implement that. and also in evaluation stage, and also in deployment stage. Across this life cycle of AI, we can have this participation ledger implemented. It just sits back there and it keep records of whatever has happened. So overall, the key takeaway is that we try to introduce an evidence-based record of participation and plus consent and plus pay. And it's working based on a regression test of each version and each change. And it provides rights and incentives for the people that wants to participate and who wants to be more aware of what their participation is making. So that's what we are proposing. And if you want to pilot this participation ledger, you can reach out anytime. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Rashid. Yeah, really interesting, as I've said about all speakers, but yeah, really fascinating stuff there in terms of how do you make practical kind of accountability measures surrounding participation, which I think is really important to kind of highlight. I wanted to open the floor for questions. I saw earlier there was some conversation around Polis. I don't know if Renee or Ruth/Connal wanted to kind of come in on that.
Sure, love to. I think it's a real challenge for us to use Gen AI to do summaries because Gen AI is not a faithful summation of conversations. It tends towards the mean. And I posted in the chat a colleague of mine who works at UBC who found out that, especially around environmental issues, it shaves off more radical approaches. So I don't know how to square this circle, particularly since Connal, I completely appreciate the constraints you have. But I don't know how we handle the use of Gen AI in trying to elicit participation.
I mean, maybe I'll just respond a little bit. Thanks, Renee, and thanks, Roshni. Ruth might have other things to say as well. Yeah. So yeah, we're approaching Polis with sort of, holding our nose a little bit. We're certainly not trying to do what I think Polis sometimes seems to do, which is sort of in this sort of push to find consensus in discourse. There's a sort of shaving off of things and recasting of things and trying to nudge people around and find these sort of consensus positions or compromise positions. That's not really it at all. I mean, without going into too much detail, really why we're using Polis is we had a massive problem looking at the scale of the game we're putting together and trying to figure out how do you get people to start talking to each other and to start experiencing expression or participation. And so what Polis does for us is it sort of gives people a asynchronous, low time commitment way, frankly, to sort of say, here's what I think, here's what I think, here's what I think about all these things. And then, instead of scrolling a feed of cats, they're scrolling a feed of comments by other people doing the same thing. So no one's going to see everything, etc., etc. But it gives people a feeling, I think, and I hope, of being in a kind of messy, getting used to expressing their opinion. We're not sure what we're going to do with any kind of eventual data processing that comes out of Polis, which is the main thing they think they offer. I don't think it is. I think for us, it's much more getting people in the swing of expressing opinions, and more importantly, getting people annoyed at other people's opinions because they don't know what those opinions are because there's no other way for everyone to interface with each other. They won't see everyone's opinion again because there's just no time for everyone to do that. And Polis isn't supposed to work that way anyway. It's sort of an aggregate statistical thing. So yeah, anyhow, in brief, that's sort of what we're doing. We want people to be engaged, annoyed, ready to fight about things at a design summit.
I might add into that as well that I think one of the purposes of the work we're doing is to have people use the kinds of tools that other people are using to do deliberation in order to create a space where we can get really pissed off about what the tools do and the problems with the tools. So we're kind of like having the debate and having the debate around the limitations of the tools. So it has this kind of double layer.
Thank you so much, both.